Good afternoon. Please have a seat. I come to Israel with a single message. You're not alone. You are not alone. As long as the United States stands, and we will stand forever, we'll not let you ever be alone. Most importantly, I know the recent terrorist assault on the people of this nation has left a deep, deep wound. More than 1,300 innocent Israelis killed, including at least 31 American citizens by the terrorist group Hamas. Hundreds of young people at a music festival. The festival was for peace, gunned down as they ran for their lives. Scores of innocents, from infants to elderly grandparents, Israelis and Americans, taken hostage. Children slaughtered, babies slaughtered, entire families massacred. Rape, beheadings, bodies burned alive. Hamas committed atrocities that recall the worst ravages of ISIS, unleashing pure, unadulterated evil upon the world. There's no rationalizing it, no excusing it, period. The brutality we saw would have cut deep anywhere in the world, but it cuts deeper here in Israel. October 7th, which was a sacred Jewish holiday, became the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It has brought to the surface painful memories and scars left by millennia of anti-Semitism and the genocide of the Jewish people. The world watched then, it knew, and the world did nothing. We will not stand by and do nothing again. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. To those who are living in limbo, waiting desperately to learn the fate of a loved one, especially to families of the hostages, you're not alone. We're working with partners throughout the region, pursuing every avenue to bring home those who are being held captive by Hamas. I can't speak publicly about all the details, but let me assure you, for me, as the American president, there's no higher priority than the release and safe return of all these hostages. To those who are grieving, a child, a parent, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, I know you feel like there's that black hole in the middle of your chest. You feel like you're being sucked into it. The survivor's remorse, the anger, the questions of faith in your soul, staring at that empty chair, sitting Shiva, the first Sabbath without them. They're the everyday things, the small things that you miss the most. The scent when you open the closet door. The morning coffee you shared together. The bend of his smile, the perfect pitch of her laugh. The giggle of your little boy, the baby. For those who have lost loved ones, this is what I know. They'll never be truly gone. There's something that's never fully lost. Your love for them and their love for you. And I promise you, you'll be walking along some days and say, what would she or he want me to do? You smile when you pass a place that reminds you of them. That's when you know. When a smile comes to your lips before a tear to your eye, that's when you know you're going to fully make it. That's what will give you the fortitude to find light in the darkest hours. When terrorists believe they could bring you down, bend your will, break your resolve. But they never did, and they never will. Instead, we saw incredible stories of heroism and courage, of Israelis taking care of one another, neighbors forming watch groups to protect their kibbutz, opening their homes to shelter survivors, retired soldiers running into danger once again, civilian medics flying across rescue missions, and off-duty medics at the music festival caring for the wounded before becoming a victim himself. Volunteers retrieving bodies of the dead so families could bury their loved ones in accordance with Jewish tradition. Reservists leaving behind their families, their honeymoons, their studies abroad without hesitation, and so much more. The State of Israel was born to be a safe place for the Jewish people of the world. That's why I was born. I've long said, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. While it may not feel that way today, Israel must again be a safe place for the Jewish people. And I promise you, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that it will be. 75 years ago, just 11 minutes after its founding, President Harry S. Truman and the United States of America became the first nation to recognize Israel. We've stood by your side ever since. We're going to stand by your side now. My administration has been in close touch with your leadership from the first moments of this attack. We're going to make sure we have what you need to protect your people, to defend your nation. For decades, we've ensured Israel's qualitative military edge. And later this week, I'm going to ask the United States Congress for an unprecedented support package for Israel's defense. We're going to keep Iron Dome fully supplied so it can continue standing sentinel over Israeli skies, saving Israeli lives. We've moved U.S. military assets to the region, including positioning the USS Ford Carrier Strike Group in the Eastern Mediterranean, with the USS Eisenhower on the way to defer further aggression against Israel and to prevent this conflict from spreading. The world will know that Israel is stronger than ever. And my message to any state or any other hostile actor thinking about attacking Israel remains the same as it was a week ago. Don't. Since this terrorist attack took place, we've seen it described as Israel's 9/11. Though for a nation the size of Israel, it was like 15 9/11s. The scale may be different, but I'm sure those horrors have tapped into some kind of primal feeling in Israel, just like it did and felt in the United States. Shock, pain, rage, an all-consuming rage. I understand, and many Americans understand. You can't look at what has happened here to your mothers, your fathers, your grandparents, sons, daughters, children, even babies, and not scream out for justice. Justice must be done. But I caution this: while you feel that rage, don't be consumed by it. After 9/11, we were enraged in the United States. While we sought justice and got justice, we also made mistakes. I'm the first U.S. president to visit Israel in time of war. I've made wartime decisions. I know the choices are never clear or easy for the leadership. There's always cost, but it requires being deliberate. It requires asking very hard questions. It requires clarity about the objectives and an honest assessment about whether the path you're on will achieve those objectives. The vast majority of Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses innocent families in Gaza as human shields, putting their command centers, their weapons, their communications tunnels in residential areas. Palestinian people are suffering greatly as well. We mourn the loss of innocent Palestinian lives like the entire world. I was outraged and saddened by the enormous loss of life yesterday in the hospital in Gaza. Based on the information we've seen to date, it appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza. The United States unequivocally stands for the protection of civilian life during conflict, and I truly grieve for the families who were killed or wounded by this tragedy. The people of Gaza need food, water, medicine, shelter. Today I asked the Israeli cabinet, who I met with for some time this morning, to agree to the delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza, based on the understanding that there will be inspections and that the aid should go to civilians, not to Hamas. Israel agreed the humanitarian assistance can begin to move from Egypt to Gaza. But let me be clear: if Hamas diverts or steals the assistance, they will have demonstrated once again that they have no concern for the welfare of the Palestinian people. And it will end. As a practical matter, it will stop the international community from being able to provide this aid. We're working in close cooperation with the government of Egypt, the United Nations and its agencies like the World Food Program and other partners in the region to get trucks moving across the border as soon as possible. Separately, I ask Israel that the global community demand that the International Red Cross be able to visit hostages. I just demanded that the United States fully supports. Today, I'm also announcing $100 million in new U.S. funding for humanitarian assistance in both Gaza and the West Bank. This money will support more than 1 million displaced and conflict-affected Palestinians, including emergency needs in Gaza. You are a Jewish state. You are a Jewish state, but you're also a democracy. And like the United States, you don't live by the rules of terrorists. You live by the rule of law. And when conflicts flare, you live by the law of wars. What sets us apart from the terrorists is we believe in the fundamental dignity of every human life. Israeli, Palestinian, Arab, Jew, Muslim, Christian, everyone. You can't give up what makes you who you are. If you give that up, then the terrorists win, and we can never let them win. You know, Israel's a miracle, a triumph of faith and resolve and resilience over impossible pain and loss. Think about October 7th, the Jewish holiday, where you read about the death of Moses, a tragic story of a profound loss to an entire nation, a death that could have left hopelessness in the hearts of the entire nation. But though Moses died, his memory, his message, his lessons have lived on for generations of the Jewish people as well as many others. Just as the memory of your loved ones will live on as well. After reading the story of Moses' death, those who observe the holiday began reading the Torah from the very beginning. The story of creation reminds us of two things. First, that when we get knocked down, we get back up again, and we begin anew. And second, when we're faced with tragedy and loss, we must go back to the beginning and remember who we are. We are all human beings, created in the image of God with dignity, humanity, and purpose. In the darkness, to be the light unto the world is what we're about. You inspire hope and light for so many around the world. That's what the terrorists seek to destroy. That's what they seek to destroy. Because they live in darkness, but not you, not Israel. Nations of conscience like the United States and Israel are not measured solely by the example or power. We're measured by the power of our example. That's why, as hard as it is, we must keep pursuing peace. We must keep pursuing a path so that Israel and the Palestinian people can both live safely, in security, in dignity, and in peace. For me, that means a two-state solution. We must keep working for Israel's greater integration with its neighbors. These attacks have only strengthened my commitment and determination and my will to get that done. I'm here to tell you the terrorists will not win. Freedom will win. So let me end where I began. Israel, you're not alone. The United States stands with you. I've told the story before, and I'll tell it again, of my first meeting with an Israeli prime minister 50 years ago as a young senator. I was sitting across from Golda Meir at her desk in her office. And she had a guy who later became prime minister, sitting next to me, just before the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And she flipped the maps up and down, telling me how bad things were and how terrible they were. All of a sudden, she looked at me and she said, "Would you like a photograph?" I looked at her. She got up from her desk and walked out into that hallway. I think it's marble flooring. Walked out in the hallway. We walked out and there were a bunch of photographers standing in front of us. We were standing shoulder to shoulder. Without her looking at me, she said to me, knowing I'd hear her, "Why do you look so worried, Senator Biden?" And I said, "Worried? Like, of course I'm worried." And she looked at me and she didn't look. She said, "Don't worry, Senator. We Israelis have a secret weapon. We have nowhere else to go." Well, today, I say to all of Israel, the United States isn't going anywhere either. We're going to stand with you. We'll walk beside you in those dark days. And we'll walk beside you in the good days to come. And they will come. As you say in Hebrew, which I'm not going to attempt to do because I'm such a terrible linguist, I'll say it in English. The people of Israel live. The people of Israel live. Israel will be safe, secure, Jewish, and democratic state today, tomorrow, and forever. May God protect all those who work for peace. God save those who are still in harm's way. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, what is your red line that would cross?
President Biden speaking in Tel Aviv, Israel, saying he is the first American president to go to Israel in a time of war. I am Libby Casey. I'm joined by James Hohman as we cover these remarks today. You can see there the pool is in that room. We heard some people try to ask questions before they left, James. Our own Tyler Pager of the Washington Post is one of the people who's able to witness this and share dispatches from the ground. James, I want to talk about some of what the president said. He said the United States isn't going anywhere, and he offered unequivocal support for Israel. He did issue some warnings, however. Caution about how America reacted after 9/11, the terrorist attacks, by starting a war in Iraq, which led to the deaths of thousands of innocent civilians, thousands of killed and injured American soldiers. He didn't mention that specifically, but we all know that's the subtext. He did say that there will be some humanitarian aid going in. That's something that he has talked to the Israelis about. He asked the Israeli cabinet to agree to the delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance to the civilians in Gaza. He warned Hamas not to interfere with that. James, let's talk about both the tone of this and also what the international community does with President Biden's presence there today.
The top line is that it is an unequivocal show of support for Israel by the sitting president. For Joe Biden to fly into Israel 10 days into a very serious war is a remarkable statement by the president. But that was a very carefully written speech, and he did stay on script, which is to say that he did say that there would be this $100 million in humanitarian assistance. He carefully urged Israel to say, the difference between a democracy and the terrorists is a respect for the dignity of every human life, and said the United States will never support the targeting of civilians. He also previewed what we know from our reporting is going to be an ask for a $100 billion supplemental package later this week that is going to include money to help Israel, will also include some humanitarian assistance, and then money for Ukraine, potentially Taiwan, potentially the border. It's going to be a big ask by the administration, but the president used the term unprecedented to describe the size of the request that he'll make. But on an emotional level, he said it was 15 9/11s. He clearly was trying to show sympathy, but also sort of gently make sure that he isn't fully wrapped up in whatever Israel does in the coming days with the potential ground invasion of Gaza.
Images say so much. You've been looking at some images from President Biden's trip just today. We were just rolling those images as he sat with Netanyahu. James, I want to go to our Jerusalem bureau chief in just a moment, but it's important to say that the audience here is not just Israelis, it's also the Palestinian people. We don't even know if people in Gaza can even receive these messages because they are in such dire humanitarian crisis right now. So as you say, the president talked about having humanity, but he is showing that the United States, in his words, is essentially siding with Israel, also innocent victims everywhere. Right. But we have to think about how the Palestinian people in the Arab world will also receive this messaging. So I want to bring in Steve Hendricks, our Jerusalem bureau chief. He just returned in the past hour from the Lebanese border. Steve, tell us what you saw there.
A second front beginning to emerge with fears of an escalation with Hezbollah growing by the day. We see a lot of military activity in the region. They've evacuated about a 2-kilometer buffer between along the Lebanese border. We made it into one of those evacuated towns where someone was killed on Sunday by a Hezbollah anti-tank missile. You're seeing armored personnel carriers, tanks, a lot of soldiers, encampments, all along that border. Israel says it's ready to fight both at one time. And certainly there's a lot of, gung-ho attitude up there, but also a lot of nervousness about what a major Hezbollah action would mean at this particular moment.
What has it been like reporting these stories over the past week? I mean, how much access do you feel like you've had? How much are you hearing from people about their personal experiences, as well as the sort of the big picture of the story?
Well, it's been a very difficult story. The access that we had in those communities, Israeli communities outside of Gaza, starting on Saturday and for all of the last 10 days or so, was extraordinary and disturbing. We got into all the scenes of the violence and we saw the carnage firsthand. Now, as the world watches this, the story is pivoting, and the real scary things that are happening right now are in Gaza, where we really are not allowed to go, and it's very frustrating and it's concerning. We have colleagues there, so we're spending a lot of time reaching people by the phone, and including our colleague who is sheltering with his family, trying to piece together what's going on. And now we might be looking at more activity in other parts of the country. So it's a very demanding story, both emotionally and physically. But we're here and we're doing all we can to tell stories from all aspects of this.
Steve, we've been talking about what's happening near the Lebanese border, but let's turn our attention to Gaza for a moment and talk about this question of a ground invasion by Israel. How is that evolving, and what does Joe Biden's presence there do for those prospects?
Well, it's almost an article of faith that Israel is going to launch some kind of major ground operation into Gaza. They certainly have the forces building there. We've seen that. We're told the preparations are quite advanced. The timing is a mystery. Things like the arrival of the president sort of suggest that nothing will happen while he's here. And there are questions about whether there is still any avenue at all for him, who has more leverage than anyone over this government, to create a change, either a smaller ground invasion, something that would address the growing concerns about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and what promises to be even more bloodshed if an army goes in. We know the diplomatic activities to try and open some access from Egypt are ongoing. They keep appearing as a possibility and then disappearing as a possibility. And there's a lot of disappointment here, particularly among people I've talked to in Gaza, that the summit in Jordan collapsed after the strike on the hospital in Gaza last night. So they're really, it's kind of hard to believe there won't be a ground invasion, but we know a lot of things are happening. We know it's hard to overstate how Israel is feeling about the support of President Biden right now. I think it's clear that he personally feels this. And so there is some remaining hope that maybe he alone could change the trajectory that we seem to be looking at.
Steve, stay with us. I want to bring in Tolu Olorunipa, who's our White House bureau chief. Tolu, thank you so much for talking with us. The Biden administration has had a constant presence in the area, whether it's the Secretary of State or now the President of the United States. Why are they taking that strategy? Why are they staying there and having sort of this rolling presence in Israel right now?
Well, I think it's important for President Biden, who has called himself a Zionist, to show with actions as well as with his words that he stands with Israel. We heard that in his speech. He talked about all the aid that has already come toward Israel in terms of military support and also, support in the forms of humanitarian aid that he's pitching to the region, as well as a big package that he said that he's going to ask Congress for more aid, both to shore up, Israel's Iron Dome. So part of the reason they've had so many people there with the sort of hear from Israel, hear what they need, but also, as we heard from the president, not only deliver that sense of support, but also have frank discussions with an ally about the cost of war, the cost of allowing rage to consume you. He said that in his speech. We've heard that he's delivered that message, and other officials have delivered a similar message behind closed doors to make sure that the Israeli Defense Forces are abiding by the law of war, are reducing and limiting the number of civilian casualties, are considering the day after, considering what happens if there are all these humanitarian catastrophes and all of these civilian losses, and Gaza becomes a place that is known for the kinds of extremism that you can have after so many people lose loved ones, especially a community that has so many young people. And so the president is delivering a message of support, but also trying to deliver a frank message about the practicality of pushing for an all-out war or an all-out siege, of not allowing humanitarian aid to get in, all of the various things that we have seen over the past week. The president is trying to be a reasonable partner and also be a voice of reason for the Israelis, knowing that they feel a sense of rage, they feel a sense that justice must be done, but also the president wants to put across the message that cooler heads must prevail, and we can't allow our rage to drive our decision making in this time of war.
We're listening to Tolu Olorunipa, our White House bureau chief. I also have Steve Hendricks with us, Jerusalem bureau chief, and James Hohmann, columnist. James, this constant presence has also seemed to signal pump the brakes, right? In this sense of, like, if the U.S. is there, I have heard people say it's a way to dissuade an all-out ground invasion. It's a way to keep that a little bit of a buffer there.
Absolutely, Libby. And the White House allies will tell you that they have decided it is more constructive to privately push to pump the brakes and to publicly show support. You're seeing them trying to thread that needle, but it absolutely is true that people in the White House believe that having Biden go there would sort of delay the ground invasion, that they wouldn't launch it while he was going, and that it might buy some time for diplomacy to prevent more senseless carnage on the ground.
Tolu, I just want to bring it back to you to ask, how is the Biden administration thinking about how the Arab world will receive this visit, this close alliance with Israel, and these remarks today?
I think in reading between the lines, you heard a little bit of a message that was delivered to the Arab world. The Biden administration is very concerned about the idea that this could spread, not only with other governments jumping in, but also we're seeing some popular activism happening in various capitals. We're seeing people rise up and protest. And we have seen what happens when that kind of sentiment is proliferating across the Arab world. We saw it with Benghazi. We saw it with the period about 10 years ago where we had the Arab Spring and all of the various things that were hard to control from the U.S., from Washington, D.C., and they are really worried in the Biden administration about things spiraling out of control. So while President Biden wanted to show his support for Israel, he talked very clearly about how much he's going to stand with Israel, but he also talked about the need to see the Palestinian people as people and not terrorists, the need to make sure that we are not allowing rage to consume us as a people, even in the wake of a terrorist attack. Some of those messages were clearly to the Israeli government, but part of the message was also being delivered to the Arab world. And you have to remember that the president was supposed to be meeting with the leaders of Egypt and Jordan, but those were canceled in part because of what happened at the hospital yesterday. And so the president and his aides realized that the Arab world is watching him very closely, and if he comes across as being only pro-Israel, not talking about civilian lives, not talking about what's happening to the Palestinian people, not talking about the plight of so many children and civilians in Gaza, then it's going to come across as tone deaf. It's going to come across as the Americans only on the side of Israel, and that's going to potentially spark even more unrest in other parts of the world. And so the president was delivering a message that he stands with Israel, but he wanted to also deliver a message to the Arab world that the United States is a fair broker here. The United States is listening to the cries of the people who are taking to the streets to decry what Israel has done and trying to bring about a just peace. He also talked about a two-state solution. That was also a nod to the sense that the Palestinian people deserve some form of self-government, and they deserve to have their cries heard as well. And so the Biden administration is very concerned about this, and they want to make sure that they're delivering our message that threads the needle of showing their support for Israel while also showing that they are listening to what's happening broadly across the region.
And you were just looking at some of those images that Tolu was talking about, protests happening in places like Beirut. Steve Hendricks, is that nuance perceived by people? I know the speech just happened, so you haven't gotten to go out and report on the reception of it yet. But as people anticipated President Biden's visit, as they've watched how the U.S. has dealt with its relationship with Israel, is some of that nuance being caught by people? I mean, are Israelis seeing this as unequivocal support, or are they also feeling that, as we've been saying, that pump the brakes message as well?
Well, I think the Israelis are feeling fairly unequivocal support from Biden. There's certainly aware of the criticism that's emerging as the conditions in Gaza have gotten worse, and absolutely after the incident with the hospital last night. But he kind of stands alone. They're used to pushback from the Americans and from the West when things are really ugly in Gaza. I think what they seem to be seeing in Biden is someone who's saying, not a blank check here, but they really feel that he personally is on their side. And I think Tolu is absolutely right. We know and we hear there's two messages. On your side doesn't mean do anything you want, and we have a very serious emergency happening in Gaza. On the Palestinian side, in the West Bank here and in Gaza, people that we are able to reach, and even Palestinians who live in Israel, I don't think they're hearing the subtleties. I think they do view it as a very one-sided support for Israel right now. And they're trying to sort of understand how these things could be happening in Gaza, even while acknowledging, the absolute horror of what happened here on October 7th. But there is a sense that no one's doing anything to stop what's happening in Gaza right now. The really skyrocketing numbers of dead, the reports that conditions are deteriorating so rapidly, and we really are looking at kind of a widespread humanitarian catastrophe there. I'm afraid they're only hearing that part of it right now.
Thank you so much, Steve Hendricks. James, I want to point out one thing that Biden said. It was a small line, but it's not insignificant. He said that the attack on October 7th, it cuts deeper here in Israel. And of course, he was referring to the Holocaust and the origin story of so many families in Israel. However, if you're someone in Gaza who's trapped right now, if you've lost loved ones in the hospital attack, whether it was an errant rocket, as the president says they have intel on now, or as other parties say, coming from the IDF, it cuts deep for you as well. Yeah. So I want you to talk briefly before we go about what Biden said about the attack on the hospital, or the hit on the hospital.
Yeah, well, to the point that Steve was just making in terms of being on Israel's side, he did earlier say that it was, quote, done by the other team, or appears to have been done by the other team. By that he meant Hamas or Islamic Jihad, that it was an errant rocket strike that wasn't intended to hit the hospital. The Washington Post cannot verify immediately the claims. The Palestinians continue to maintain that it was an Israeli strike. The Gaza Health Ministry said today that 471 people died in the hospital. The Israelis have blamed the Palestinians. Biden said that the Pentagon showed him data indicating that Israel was not responsible for the deadly strike on the hospital. And you heard him during that speech acknowledge the awfulness, that everyone should agree what happened at the hospital was terrible, but that it doesn't appear to be the Israelis. We also know that Biden will call on Air Force One the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and the Egyptian President al-Sisi to talk with them. So the Jordan meeting off, but Biden is still trying to do some degree of shuttle diplomacy, and I think it is noteworthy that in that speech he did reiterate his support and U.S. support for a two-state solution, which would be to give the Palestinians statehood.
James Hohmann, thank you so much. Thanks also to Tolu Olorunipa, Steve Hendricks, and all of our colleagues who are reporting both from the region as well as here as we try to piece together what we can of what's happening in a place like Gaza as well as what's happening on the ground in Israel. I'm Libby Casey. Thank you for watching this historic day. The President of the United States speaking from Israel during a time of war. We're going off the air now, but we'll be back in just 20 minutes. Our team will be covering next the House Speaker vote as Jim Jordan of Ohio attempts yet again today to become the next Speaker of the House. You can find that coverage starting at 11 a.m. on YouTube as well as on the Washington Post homepage. Thanks so much.
The Washington Post newsroom delivers breaking events around the world as they happen. Unrivaled reporting from the journalists you've come to trust. To get the facts fast and meet the challenges of today head on. Get the news that matters most with a special offer by visiting WashingtonPost.com/watch. Subscribing unlocks instant access, bringing you the Post's award-winning coverage anytime, any place. Because democracy dies in darkness.